well, thanks everybody for joining me again this session on watercolor snacks. I'm excited to paint with you guys. Hopefully you had a chance to see in the mixed group the illustration that we're going to be painting, but if not, you are welcome to do your own painting or kind of follow along as best you can with, doing your own drawing of what you see on the screen. Also, I just wanted to mention that I have a new little studio mate running around. I found a kitten and have taken her in. So she is recovering from an eye infection. Now she's got tons of energy. So you might see a little kitten zipping around in the background. So if you see that, that's my new studio mate. But yeah, so let's go ahead and jump into what we're going to be working on today. So Sarah, we can switch over to the other camera. So I have the supplies from the spring 2024 box out. Just a quick recap to go over what I have. In case you don't have the box, that's totally fine. You can still follow along with whatever materials you have. You can grab something similar. In the box, we had this really nice Fabriano hot press watercolor paper. I already have my paper pulled out and my drawing started. I'm using a half sheet of paper, but you can use the whole sheet or any size that you want. And mine is already out of the paper pad, so I'm going to set the whole thing aside, but this is what we're working with on as our paper surface. Then I have the Micron PN. We've joked that it's the perfect nib, but it stands for plastic nib. But this pen I think I'm going to use at the end, so I'm going to set that aside for now. Two brushes, a round brush, and what's called a petal brush, which is very fitting for our full bloom box, which is the theme of flowers. And then the paints, of course, the My Mary Blue paint tubes. I actually already have mine squeezed out onto the palette, so I'm not going to squeeze more out just yet. I might do it a little bit later, but I have them already good to go, so I'm going to set those aside as well. This kit also came with this really awesome spray bottle, which I use to keep my paints wet. There's a lot of other neat things that you can do with the spray effect. So if you want, you can spray your paper first. You can spray your paints. I'll probably do a little video or write up about some different things you can do with the spray bottle. But for now, if you just want to use it to at least activate your paints, you can do that. Or if you, think of something cool and creative that you want to do with the spray bottle as well, feel free to share that because I'd be really curious to see what other people are trying. And then this kit also came with this little washi tape that I designed that has little bees on it. So if you want to use washi tape to tape off your edges, you can use that tape. I think I might use mine to kind of tape it in place so it's not moving around so much, but I'm just going to have it off to the side. And then the last thing, well, almost last thing I have two containers of water, which I usually keep to one for activating or watering down my paints, and then one for cleaning my brushes, so that way my paints don't get muddied with other colors. And then the last thing, the actual last thing, is I always have a paper towel handy. I usually fold it up and then just tuck it underneath of my palette next to my water cups, so that I always have it handy if I need to wipe off my brushes or sit my brushes down on my table, that I have something to sit them on. Okay, so if you have not yet seen this little illustration that I did, it's posted in the mix group, and you were welcome to print it out and trace it. If you wanted to copy it, that's totally fine. You're welcome to do that. Or you could have just looked at it and kind of used it as inspiration to draw your own. You can also draw a completely different thing, something that's totally your own idea. I was inspired by the flower fairy paintings. I always liked those as a kid. So I was thinking about a little fairy that was living in, this is Lily of the Valley, which is the official flower of May. at least from what I looked up, that is our flower for May, so I thought that was fitting. And I just have a little fairy wearing an acorn cap, but you can, you know, have any fairy that you like on there. So I'm just gonna set this aside. I used a light table to trace my drawing, but another technique that you could use is if you printed out this drawing on the back, you could use graphite to kind of scribble all over the back, and then you can trace over with a ballpoint pen when with the paper underneath, and it will transfer very easily onto your watercolor paper. You can also, of course, just sketch directly onto your watercolor paper. But I'm gonna bring my camera down a little bit just so that you can see the details a little more clearly. So some options that you could do, you could, if you wanted to trace over the pencil drawing with pen and do your line work first, you can do that. That is how I would typically approach an illustration. But I've been trying to add the color first and then the line work after. So that's what I'm going to be doing tonight, but you can absolutely approach this however you like. But yeah, I think we could go ahead and get started. And of course, if anyone has questions or anything like that, you can feel free to ask in the chat from there. So, okay. So I think I'm going to kind of approach this drawing kind of like filling in a coloring page a little bit. So I'm just going to kind of block out where my colors are going to go, and then I'll add details in after I've blocked in my main colors. And I'm going to start with my biggest area, which is going to be these green petals. So if you've seen Lily of the Valley flowers before, they are these really pretty little white, almost like bell-shaped flowers. And then the stems and the leaves are a really bright, vibrant green. So I'm going to start with that green. And the colors that I have on my palette, I have that the green that came in the set is called, make sure I have it right, the green gold paint. And I think I'm going to mix it with a little bit of blue. So I'm going to take my bigger brush, which is my petal brush, and get some water. And I already mixed this before, so if this didn't already have paint in it, it would just be a clean well with water in it. I'm going to scoop up, let me move this a little closer so you can see. I'm going to scoop up some of my green gold and mix it into the water. And then get the excess paint and water off of my brush, and then give it a wipe and rinse it. And can't see because it's off camera, but I'm rinsing in my other cup, getting that paint water off, and then pulling some clean water to grab some of this blue paint, which this paint was dried, so I need to reactivate it a little more. And then I'll mix those two together. So I'm mixing in some blue because I want this green to be less yellow. I don't want it to be quite so warm. So I'll just show you on this scrap paper. It's going to be a cooler green versus this green gold, which is much more yellow. So if you ever have a color that you're like, well, this isn't quite what I was looking for, you can always mix in some other colors to get to be a little closer to your goal for what you're looking for. This is a really nice set. I've mentioned it before, but if you haven't heard me say, I love this color palette because I feel like it's the perfect set of colors to mix a really wide range of color. Especially because it includes this kind of magenta pink rather than a crimson red. So you have a little more flexibility with the colors you can mix. All right. So I actually have a little bit more of a watery mix, which I think is good for a first layer. And now I'm just gonna go in and start to fill in, just rearrange a little bit, give myself a little more space. I'm just gonna start to fill in where the leaves are on here. This petal brush is a really interesting shape because it is really wide closer to the ferrule and then very thin at the top. So you can get a variety of brush strokes, both that cover a lot of area, but you could also get some nice fine details, which I think is great because it's always good to have a brush with versatility. And especially because there are some of these thinner, finer details, having that thin end of the brush is really helpful. You can get around some of these smaller details here. And I'm trying not to go too quickly, but I'm also trying to work fast enough that I can move the paint around while it's still wet because I don't want it to look patchy. So it's going to be a little bit patchy, but we'll add more layers to it, and that will help. I like when I can paint these big areas that are just one color. I feel like it's really nice to be able to just fill in the big shapes. And especially, I think it can be not necessarily stressful, but um, have less attention span for when I need to fill in little teeny tiny details versus being able to just get a nice big area one color. So it's nice when you can block out the shapes easily like this. And the other cool thing that I like about drawing plants is that it's okay if, especially if you're looking at a real plant in real life or a photograph of a plant as a reference image or reference just to look at, is that because it's an organic shape, you can kind of make it look however you want. And as long as it has basic parts of the plant or flower, people will understand that it's a plant or a flower. And if you know, don't get all the details exactly right, it's okay. Because the shapes are organic and they do sort of follow a I don't want to say a pattern per se, but the direction that the leaves grow, or the way that the flowers, like on this lily of the valley, you can see the flowers kind of alternate across the stem. So there are some features that sort of define a certain type of plant, but when you're drawing it, it doesn't have to be perfectly spaced out, or if you miss adding a leaf somewhere, or if you decide you want to draw fewer flowers, you can absolutely do that. And I find that to be pretty freeing because it's okay if it's not exactly how you saw it in real life or in a photograph. Okay, so getting there, we've got most of our shapes filled in. And you'll notice I've been kind of going leaf by leaf rather than just painting across the whole shape. And that's because I'm trying to get my brush strokes to be even within each leaf shape so that it's less patchy overall. And I can use directional brush strokes with each individual leaf, or at least major leaf shapes that are grouped together. And then that kind of helps all the mark making to look like it flows together more evenly. So instead of just kind of going across or just filling it in as one shape, I'm trying to stick within the shapes that I have drawn. I also went a little bit more, not necessarily cartoony, but more stylized. So I did look at a reference image for the flowers, but I kind of simplified them a little bit. So that's another thing you can do when you are doing a painting or a drawing. You can definitely use something as an inspiration, but if you don't want to draw all the details, you can get something that's close to the shape that you're looking at and have some flexibility and make it your own that way. I think these flowers, when I was drawing them, I feel like they look a little bit like popcorn, which I thought was very cute. So as I'm painting some of these bigger areas, I'm just kind of starting with the smaller end, the tip of the brush, and then pressing down so that more of the surface of the brush is touching the paper. And then I can, like I was saying, for these smaller, more detailed areas, then I can switch over to the tip of the brush. But usually, as a rule of thumb, for bigger areas, you want to use a bigger brush. So that, again, it's less streaky, but it's just more efficient. You can cover more area more quickly. So makes sense to try to use the bigger part of the brush on a bigger area. Okay, so I'm just going to smooth out this a little bit. So I just noticed it's a little uneven. Okay, so now we filled in the green part of the painting. I'm going to clean off my brush. And I'm thinking we should move on to painting our little fairy friend. Although I might start with painting the ground first. And this is a good opportunity to show how to paint or how to mix. I want to create sort of an earthy brown color to go on where the dirt is going to be. So I'm going to move this aside and show you how we might mix a color like that. Since we don't have a brown tube of paint, we can mix that color. So I'm going to take my paper towel, dip that into my clean water cup, and just wipe out the old mixture that was in this well. Like that. Okay. So I'm going to put some water in the well first, some clean water, so that way the paint spreads a little more. I think I'm going to take some of the red because I want it to be warm. I'll take some of this. And some of you have seen me mix up this more crimson red before, but I'll show you again because I think it's pretty cool. I'll take some of this yellow. It's going to create like an orangey crimson color. Okay, so here's a little bit of color theory, is that if you want to neutralize or create like a grayish color, and having a little scrap piece of paper over here to show you the mixture, you will want to take the opposite on the color wheel of your color that you're mixing. So I've got this sort of reddish orange. I'm going to take a little bit of this green. Actually, I want a little more cool green. So let me cool it back down a little bit because I want to pull this cooler green. Take some of that and we'll add it to our mixture. I might need to add more. But we can already start to test it a little bit. It's still a little red. Let's take a little more blue, a little more of this yellow green. Mix that up. All right. So now we're starting to get a little bit more of a brown color. So I think it's still a little warm and a little light. So now we can take some of this. This is the Payne's Gray. I don't want much because this is gonna, you know, really darken up the color. But I'm gonna mix a little bit of that in there. Now let's test it. Getting a little too green. This is kind of how you just play with mixing colors. You have to tweak it a little bit here and there. And add a little, take a little away. But you'll eventually get a color that you're looking for. This is looking a lot closer to what I want, sort of a earthy brown color. So I think this mixture looks pretty good. So you see what I mean with this this set of colors, I feel is really versatile. And you can mix, you know, a good amount of colors and they stay pretty saturated, even the neutral colors, which I think is really nice. The cool thing about these My Merry Blue paints, and I've mentioned it last time, but I think it's worth repeating, that it only uses one pigment. So you get really pure color mixtures when you mix them together. So this is a green gold, but it doesn't have a bunch of other pigments or fillers in it that make the color less pure, less saturated. So even when you're mixing the colors together, your mixtures are more true to what you're looking for because you don't have a lot of other pigments coming into play and altering the outcome of your mixtures, which is really, really nice. So I've been very pleased with these paints so far for the box this quarter. I'm like, oh, this is amazing. Okay, so I took some clean water, although my brush still has a little bit of paint on it, it looks like. But I put some clean water just to get my paper damp because I'm going to do the wet and wet technique. Wet and wet is when your paper is already moistened, not too drippy wet, but moistened enough that when you put the wet paint mixture on your paper, it'll start to spread. So that's why it's called wet and wet. Yeah, I'm really happy with this brown color. I feel like it's not too, I mean, it is supposed to be dirt. I was gonna say it's not too muddy. It is literally, we're painting mud. But in terms of the color mixture, I think it turned out nicely. Um, and I'm happy with this shade of brown. Okay, so I'm just kind of feathering it out a little bit. I didn't really have plans to add a background, although maybe we will fill it in with a color later. But I'm just kind of feathering out the edges. You could continue it out if you wanted to suggest more of the ground going off the sides. Like that. All right, I'm gonna switch up my brushes now. I'm gonna put this one aside, and now I'm gonna use this smaller round brush. I usually wet my brushes before putting them in paint, so I just wetted my brush. Taking some of this brown paint mixture, and now I'm gonna paint the little acorn cap. And I feel like the pants would also be brown. So I'm gonna paint those the same color. Okay, that looks good. Okay, so let's see. I think I want to make his wings. I feel like blue would be a really pretty color, but you can make them any color that you like. Maybe you want a nice bright pop of color. If you use the, let's see, let me give you the exact name. It is the Quinacridone Lake. So that's that magenta color. If you added that in the middle, that would add a huge pop of color that would draw the eye right to that little fairy. So actually, I might do a little bit of both. So I might add a little blue around the edges. And you could do any kind of little pattern that you want. He has maybe butterfly wings. Although I do think that with moth and butterfly wings, the way I learned that to tell the difference between a moth and a butterfly is that when you look at how their wings are closed, so hopefully I'm not getting this backwards, but a butterfly's wings when they're resting are closed together like that, and a moth's wings are flat when they're resting. I think that's right, because Luna moth wings are like that. So technically I guess he has moth wings because they're flat when he's resting. But that was an interesting fact I learned when I was a camp counselor. I worked at a nature camp. So that's something that I still remember today is one of those takeaways from that. So now you know, if you're ever trying to tell the difference between a butterfly and a moth. It might not always be the case. Some, I feel like there's probably going to be some variability, but for the most part, I'm pretty sure that's a good way to tell. I'm doing a really simple blue and pink together, but you could certainly, if you want to add more details, you could absolutely add more. You could add a little pattern. If you think about how butterfly wings are sometimes meant to look like camouflage, you could do green wings with kind of a camouflage effect or something like that. So you can get as creative as you like. I think that I'm gonna give him a golden kind of golden green vest. I was thinking about hobbits and hobbit outfits when I was coming up with the little outfit that he has on. So I was thinking about their wool vests and pants. So that's kind of where the color palette that I'm thinking of is coming from. But something I always really enjoy um, with drawing or coming up with characters is thinking about if a creature were really tiny, whether it's a mouse or a fairy or some kind of little creature, what they might use for hats or tables or uh, something fun like that. Like, what kind of human-sized items would they find and how would they use it practically for them? Kind of like the borrowers, if you're familiar with the borrowers, how they would find things like um, spools of thread or something and use that as a table. I always thought that was fun, so I enjoy thinking about that. Okay, so I'm gonna take the same uh mixture of brown and I'm just gonna water it down. I move this over a little so you can see more. I'm taking like a really watered down amount of paint, like this. And this is what I'm gonna use for the skin tone. So he'll have kind of a really light brown skin color. Oh, move that up a little. Filling the teeny little hands. Okay. And then I think I'll use a little bit of this mixed with a little tiny bit of the Payne's Gray. So I'm making I don't have a very big palette, so sometimes if I'm using a tiny bit of paint, I'll make a teeny little mixture because I really don't need much. But I'm just making a slightly darker brown so that I can fill in his hair over here because he has a little tuft of hair poking out from under the acorn cap. So I'm going to zoom in a little more. Hopefully, it seems like a little unfocused, but hopefully it'll focus a little more. I'm try to focus it a little. Just so you can see some of the details of what I'm painting in there. So this little round brush is awesome for these little teeny weeny details. So if you want to do a little painting like this, it's really awesome for that. And I'll just use the same dark brown to fill in his little boots. Now, if you're somebody who doesn't like to do this kind of tiny detail, or maybe it's difficult to paint really tiny, you don't have to do something this small. You could absolutely paint larger, or you could paint more loosely. So if you have a hard time getting into these little tiny areas and making it really fit within that shape, don't feel like you always have to color within the lines. You can absolutely do something that's more loose. That's the amazing thing about watercolor and how versatile it is. I feel like you can have a little bit more of a refined, filled in sort of illustration, or you can work very loosely. It works for both. So just wanted to mention that if you're feeling like, oh my gosh, that's really tiny, really detailed, and it's hard for me to see, or it's hard for me to paint that small, it's okay if you work differently, that you can totally work more loosely and it will still look really beautiful. And in fact, you could just sort of block in really loose color and then go over it with the pen to trace out the lines, and it's okay if it doesn't line up perfectly. It has that kind of misregistration look that is, I think, very charming. So just wanted to put it out there that, you know, as an artist, you can do whatever you want with your art, any kind of style that you want, and whatever works best for you is the right way to do it. Okay. So now that we have our little fairy filled in, I'm going to zoom back out a little bit so we can see the full picture. Try to get that as focused as I can. All right, so now what I want to do is just go in and add in some areas of shadow. So you see we have some leaves that are overlapping. So I'm going to go in and find some parts that would be getting less light. So they would be a darker green. So I'm going to go back to my, oh no, my mixture's over here. Oops, I rotated my palette and I threw myself off. So this was the green, gold, and blue that we mixed. And now I'm just going to take a little bit of that Payne's gray and mix it in so I have an even darker green. I think I could even take a little more. A nice dark green. And now I'm just going to kind of figure out where I want to put those shadows in. So you can either follow along with me with what I'm doing, or you can decide to put them wherever you like. Or you might decide you don't want any shadows at all, and that's also totally fine. But the key is, if you're not sure where to add in the shadows, just think about where things are overlapping, and you can put a shadow next to where things are overlapping. And then another tip is, if you're not sure where to put the shadows when you don't have a reference, is pick one direction of where the light is shining and keep your shadows consistent, so that they're all sort of facing the same direction. And that will make it look like it's supposed to be in shadow. And then it makes sense. So I'm thinking about how right here, that's where there's a leaf over top. So just adding in the shadows there. Anything that looks like it should be in the background. And you'll notice I'm not, for some of these, I'm not doing the whole entire bottom part in shadow, because sometimes there will be light bouncing off of certain areas, or that not everything is completely blocked and in shadow, that some parts of it are blocked. There might be shadows cast by other parts of the stem, or other parts of the plant. So I'm just thinking about those areas. Come in a little closer, because as I look at my screen, it seems like not quite able to see all the details. So hopefully you can see a little more clearly now.
Hey Amelia, Sarah jumping in here real quick.
Yeah,
Just wanted to know we're about halfway through class.
gotcha. Thanks.
And I appreciate you zooming in so much to see the detail. It is clear.
Oh, good. Okay.
At least from my view, it's clear. But yeah, this is one that's like so intricate that it's very
Yes.
beneficial to see it close. So thank you.
Yes. You're welcome. Yeah, there's a lot of little details, but even though there's a lot of details in the drawing itself, hopefully the actual watercolor itself is not overly complicated since there's a lot of just blocking in the shapes. So I hope everybody, if you're following along, are finding it to be maybe simpler than you thought it would be. Okay, and I'm just going over a couple areas where as they dry, I want it to look darker. So I've gone over, all right, down here at the bottom, I've gone over maybe 2 or 3 times. So you might find that, as you are working on different areas of the painting, as it's drying, it there's something called the drying shift that as your paint dries, um, it will get lighter. So just keep that in mind that, part of the process of working with watercolor paints is that you work in layers and you add more to your painting over time as it dries. So if it's not quite as dark as it looked when you first applied the paint, don't worry. You just go in and add more layers where you need to. And again, this is kind of like, you can either sort of follow along with what I'm doing, or truthfully, I'm just working kind of intuitively, which means I'm just sort of thinking of where a shadow feels right for where I'm looking. So if you are just kind of going with the flow and adding a shadow in where you think it might be interesting, you can totally do that. But like I said, if you're trying to follow along with what I'm doing, I'm, just going off of what feels right based off of where things might be overlapping or where I think it might look interesting to have a shadow. So hopefully that helps you kind of think about where you might like to put your shadows. I think adding in this dark green shadow area also is a nice way to break up the shapes just through color by itself and not necessarily through more drawn details. So that's another way to add interest to a painting that you're working on. If you want to just do the paints and not a drawing part of the piece, then you can break up or add interest by just varying the levels of value or lightness and darkness of the colors, and that will really make a difference in just breaking up and adding some visual interest. I think this will really come together and start to pop um closer to the end when we start adding in the line work. Then we'll really start to see some of those details come through. I think already just between adding that first layer of light green and these shadows, I feel like that already starts to make the piece start to come alive and feel like it has some depth. And I haven't really done too much. Just having the light and the dark really makes a huge difference and adds some energy and dimension to the piece. I hope everyone else is having as nice weather as we're having where I am. It's been incredibly rainy earlier this month, and we finally have days that are sunny, 70 degrees and not humid, which is a big deal for where I am in Maryland. It's very humid here usually, so I'm just very much enjoying working on this painting and hearing the birds in the background. I've left the window open, so I hope everyone else is also enjoying some nice, pleasant spring weather while we have it before it starts to get really hot for the summer. Oh, I just realized I missed an area. Just add this darker green in here. Sometimes that happens. Oh, sorry. I realized I was off the screen. Sometimes that happens. You might miss a patch. Just go in and fill it in after. But that happens to me sometimes. It's not like, oops, I missed a whole big area. Didn't mean to do that. Something else you can think about is how the leaf might be folded. So not all the leaves are totally flat. Sometimes they kind of curl in on themselves. So you can also think about where your leaf might be curling or overlapping. So like I have an area up here where the leaf is starting to curl in on itself a little bit. So that might be an interesting area where you could add some shadows to your painting. All right, so I'm gonna switch over to my detailed round brush, and I'm just gonna go in, and now I'm gonna kind of use this almost like a drawing tool, and just go in and add in some details. I'm basically just painting lines, but I thought it might be interesting to make it look a little bit like there's some veins or marks on the leaf itself. And I want to do this with the color and not the pen because I don't want it to be super dark, but I do want it to be noticeable. Just enough that it's a little bit of detail. And I'm just kind of following the shape of the leaf, not really doing anything super detailed, just thinking about where the lines might follow the contour of the leaf, the overall shape. And again, I'm doing this to kind of just break up some of those more solid green areas. And if it seems dark, remember it's going to dry a little lighter. But if you're worried about how dark it is, you can always add some water to it. That will thin it out and lighten it more. So I'm just kind of going in and I'm just locating any other areas that might need some shadows. Like that. So not too much. I didn't, it wasn't super detailed, but again, just adding those layers and the the lines and marks really adds some dimension and kind of gives it some personality. And you know, I feel like we didn't do too much, but it really made a big difference with that. All right, so for these little white lily of the valley, I want to create a very light shadow. So I'm gonna mix up some blue. I'm gonna just zoom out a little so that you can see the colors that I'm mixing, and then I'll zoom back in for the details. But I want to mix up some of this blue, and running out of room on my palette, fortunately. Uh, but I'm just gonna mix over here a little bit of the magenta. I want to make a very light purple. Let me take just water it down. This is going to be very watered down because I don't want it to be a super vibrant violet purple color. I just want something that's a really light purple because I'm creating a shadow for the white flowers. So zoom back in just so you can see the details here. I'm going to take that super watered down purple, and now I'm just going to do the same thing that I was doing before. Oh, I feel like this is even still a little dark, but it's okay. These are more in shadow. And you'll notice I'm not really fussing too much with getting it to be a perfect shape. I'm actually kind of just scribbling in a little with the brush, and I feel like these are a little too dark. I'm blotting them with the paper towel. I think I need a little more water. So it'd be better if I had another well to mix them in, but I ran out of space. So if it feels too dark, just mix a little more water in there. And I'm doing the same thing I did with the leaves, just picking one direction that the shadows are going to go in and staying consistent with all the flowers where the shadows are going, and just paying attention to where things might be overlapping a little bit. And that's just where I'm figuring out where to put the shadows in. And I'm just adding, again, similarly to the leaves, just some little details where I think there might be maybe a groove, like where the petals are meeting in the middle, like a little dent or something. That's where I'll suggest another shadow goes. And if there's something that's more in shadow, I'll just fill it in more. Yeah, look how much dimension we're already getting just with that little bit of purple. I really think the trick to getting something to look I don't necessarily want to say realistic, but to look like it's not just flat, is value, and adding light and dark and suggesting shadows makes a big difference, even if it's subtle like this. Because you can create some pretty almost, again, I don't necessarily want to say realistic, but things that look to us as we look at them, they look real and like they have form, even if it's not, if it doesn't have a ton of detail, or if it's not even totally complete, like if parts of it are missing, something that is really loose and gestural, just with a couple of brush strokes. If you add light and dark, it will really make a difference in making something look realistic. So definitely a good thing to practice. It's just having a nice value range in your artwork, whether it's stylized or not. All right, and then I have a couple little ones peeking into the background. Those will probably be mostly purple. Okay. Yeah, so there you go. Pretty simple, but adds a good amount of dimension and, makes it look like there's some light being cast, and some shadow being cast. Um, Something that could be interesting that you might want to experiment with is just going over with a layer of purple in some of your green shadows. That'll tie some of your colors together. And with a really light glaze, a really thin wash of that purple on top, it's going to add a little more dimension. So let's just try it. I don't know if I'll go over the whole thing just because I want to work on other parts of the painting, but you can see just a little bit. We'll bring in some of that purple into other areas. It'll darken it a little bit more, and sort of tie your shadows together. So something to try if you haven't tried it before. And remember, it's always good to experiment with stuff. And something I always remind myself is that there's no limit to how many times you can do a drawing. So if it doesn't, or painting, I should say, if it doesn't come out exactly how you want it or you feel like you messed up, you can always do it again, try again, and do something differently the next time you approach it. So I just added a little bit of purple in there. I feel like it really added some more depth. It is gonna dry, it's gonna dry a little lighter, but I think made a difference. I think I'm going to continue adding in some shadows with purple in my little character here. And especially because he has the little white blouse on under his vest. Just adding some shadows. Again, trying to follow the convention that I set with the direction of the shadows. That. All right, and I'm gonna go back in and add a little more to the brown. Let's take a little bit of the brown. I'm taking some of that brown and the Payne's gray again, and just going in to add some shadows by the feet. And you'll notice I'm just kind of using the side of my brush really loosely. And again, just trying to achieve that same effect of, you've got light and dark. It's going to suggest form, even if you're not, perfectly trying to fill in any kind of shape. The texture itself the texture and the value will suggest that we're looking at the dirt. And I added a little more water because I felt it was too hard for me to try to move it across the paper. So if that's the case, just add a little more water to your paint and it'll slide across your paper more smoothly. It will just be a little bit lighter, so you might have to add another layer in that case. But yeah, so we have some nice texture there. Okay, so let's see. Just know I'm gonna look for any other little areas I might have missed. It looks like I missed another little patch back here. And actually, I think I'm gonna go ahead and just go through and give a purple glaze over some of these green areas in the back. So I'll just go, I think I'm gonna mix up more purple because now I'll need a little more. And again, if your paints are getting dry, you can use your little spritz bottle. I'm gonna spritz my palette because it's feeling a little dry. And that'll help my paints mix a little better. Okay. I'm gonna switch over to my bigger brush just because I'm gonna cover some slightly bigger areas. And now I'm just gonna add my glaze. So I wrote a little tutorial about this, or a tip on Mix, so you can go and find it if you want to read more, but I talked a little bit about the glazing technique. So glazing is when you add a layer on top of your dried wash or painting that you put down already. And it might be the same color or similar color, or it might be a different one like this. But the trick is that you're working with transparent layers, so the color underneath is going to show through. So that's why it's called a glaze, because you're glazing a layer over top. And it's a great technique if you want to mix colors just on your paper with your paints versus mixing them in a palette and then applying the mixture to your paper as one mixture. So what's really cool about using a glazing technique is that your colors will start to almost glow because you've got these multiple colors that you're looking at once. So it's a really nice technique. Just work with light washes and layers, so don't get really heavy-handed with the pigment. Just you want something that's really watery, watered down. And that's gonna be how you just build up those washes and glazes. So look at that. Isn't that cool how, you've got that sort of really light purple on top. I've always thought that purple and green look really nice together. So it's a color pairing that I've been fond of. I think this technique for adding shadows is really pretty. And I personally like when colors are a little more complex than just than just working with, uh, the color that you applied and then a shade of it that is just that color plus black or plus Payne's gray or, something like that. So um, this is a technique I like to use as well. Okay. Just kind of went in and found some more shadows, and then I already did that with my little character, but I want to add a little more. It's in the face. I didn't add that yet. And again, if you go a little too dark, just blot it up a little bit. And those shadows were a little darker than I meant for them to be. Let's go in and add and darken up where I want it to be. So I tend to work very, very tiny with very fine detail. So again, if you are someone who is like, that's way too tiny for me, you don't have to go so tiny. Um, but I love these little brushes for I feel like the tip is so fine with these pedal brushes, which I think is really cool because it's almost like I'm painting with like two hairs on the edge of the brush. So I tend to get really delicate with my brushwork. But like I said, you can use the wider part of the brush if you're not quite so delicate with how you paint. Um, that's actually something I've been working on for my personal practice is to be less detailed because I really get into this teeny weeny little details and trying to work bigger. So okay. I'm just going over this acorn cap again, so I felt like it was starting to get lost a little bit. But I think when we go over these details with pen, everything is gonna really start to pop. Okay. So I'm gonna try to avoid this part because it's still wet, but I think I'm gonna go ahead and start outlining the drawing where it is dry. So I'm zooming out for you a little bit. I'm just gonna move my palette off to the side because knowing me, I'll put my hand right into the paint. And now I'm just gonna go over my line work. And what's cool now is you can choose to either go over all the line work or you can be selective and leave some parts as being outlined with just the color. So for example, I'm not going to trace over these green lines here. But I think also some parts I'm just going to leave either a pencil line or a paint line. So you can be selective about what gets an outline and what doesn't. Really just depends on what you want to pop. So this bold black outline is the darkest part of the painting. So whatever is not this strong, heavy line is going to recede a little bit more. So it just won't um, pop out as much, but it'll still be visible. So that's why you can choose to be a little more selective if you don't want something to pop as strongly, then you can let that sort of fall back into the background. Like I mentioned before, also, if your line work doesn't perfectly match up with your paint and there's some overlap, that's also perfectly okay. Like I said, I think that is a really aesthetically pleasing and charming effect. So I personally like having that happen. And I think it's a upside to working with watercolor. It's kind of just messy by nature. So um, you can be really precise with watercolor, but I personally like to be a little more loose and messy with the color. It's all about your personal preference and what you like and what you want your outcome to be. Going over line work is definitely one of my favorite parts of doing an illustration. I always find it really relaxing to just trace over the lines because they're already there. You just kind of follow what is on the paper. It's not the end of the world if you accidentally go over a line wrong. You don't really have to think about it. You just kind of get into the zen of tracing over the lines that are already there. So I always really enjoy this part of the process. I don't know if you guys can hear my kitten's running around playing with her. She's one of those round, it's shaped like a donut and it has a ball in the center that they can push around. And she is having the time of her life playing with that right now. So and she's been running around in the background. Um, I found her actually on Monday, so she's very new to my family. She's a feral cat that was she's only 6 weeks old, so she's really little. She's very small, but I took her to the vet on Tuesday and they said that um I should keep her and take care of her in my house. So I was like, oh good, because usually you take kittens when they're a little older, around 8 weeks, but she was very sick. So as you can imagine from all of her running around and bouncing off the walls, she's feeling a lot better. So I'm very happy about that. So, but it's been a busy and fun week with adding her to our family. So she's got a ton of energy. She's bouncing off the walls. But she's so darn cute. So I don't know if any of you have used this PN plastic nib micron pen before, but truly it is one of my favorites. Just in terms of doing line work. These pens are nice because you get a uniform line. So if you're not looking for variety in your line, this gives you a really nice crisp outline. The way that the ink flows is just really nice and even. I'm a big fan. These are great for illustrations like this, but also if you like to do drawings or, you know, anything else that you can use line work with, these are great.
Hey, Amelia.
Hey, Sarah.
Jumping in here to let you know that there's about 10 minutes left of class.
Oh, great. Okay.
So I'm curious if anybody feels like sharing their
Yeah.
creation. Now would probably be the time. So if anybody feels like sharing, feel free to turn your camera on, um, or wave, give me like a virtual hand wave. Um, You are more than welcome to keep working. Oh, Lori has her hand up. Lori, I am going to
People are
let
shooting off
you.
fireworks in my neighborhood. Surprised me.
Lori, go ahead and share what you got.
Okay, I went rogue.
Oh, yay. I love that.
Just did
Ooh,
Ooh. Wow, that's beautiful.
oh, thank you. So that's it.
Oh, I love the background.
Thank you. I was done so early, I had to keep painting.
Oh, oh, that's okay.
So,
Oh, that's great. I love the flowers too. The way that they're kind
thank
of
you.
coming up and out like that. Oh, that's so pretty.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I like it too. You know that everyone's pieces are not going to be the same. So I think that's what
Yeah.
makes it so awesome to see what you've made. So thanks for sharing, Lori.
Yeah, thank you.
Anybody else feel like sharing what they've made tonight? No pressure. You are welcome to share your artwork on ArtSnacks Mix, which is the online platform, probably where you got this Zoom link. While you're finishing up, I can give a little bit of, I don't know, background, insight, things that are going on in ArtSnacks world.
Yeah.
Um, So I think we have a couple more live streams for the full bloom box. I know we just got this box and it feels like we've had it forever already.
Yeah.
So I want to give everyone a heads up that during the summer, we're going to be um, doing 3 live streams. So this is technically the spring box. The summer box will come out in a few weeks. Um, so every subscription service is doing 3 live streams as opposed to 4 for the summer. A lot of people are going away, a lot of people are traveling, and we just want to make sure that we're accommodating everyone and when they're available. So yeah, I just thought that I'd announce that there. The schedule always comes out on ArtSnacks Mix, so be sure to look at it there. We'll also email you. So live streams, there'll be 3 during the summer for each box. And we'll also be playing around with the software. For World Collage Day, we used a new software on YouTube that was really fun, and allowed the quality to be a little bit better for our videos, and also have a more lively chat room for everybody to be in. So yeah, we're working on a couple things behind the scenes, primarily with video quality, and also being more thoughtful as to when we have the live streams. Some of them may be recorded. We might try that route, like pre-recorded and then just launched during the week or something like that. So we are playing around with it. So if anybody else has any feedback about your live streams or anything like that, feel free to message me. I'm very accessible on ArtSnacks Mix. Just look me up, Sarah Rubenstein. And yeah, let's chat.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'm very excited for the new platform. Zoom's great, but I think it's always fun to try something different. And I really enjoyed, I caught the replay of the World Collage Day, and it was just so cool to see how everything came together for that. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what we can do with watercolor snacks too. So it's going to be fun.
It's gonna be really fun. Yeah, so it might even do away with using Zoom altogether. You'll be able to access everything just on a simple link on our YouTube page. So
Mhm.
making it more accessible for more eyeballs of artists.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
Neat. All
Well,
right.
carry on, Amelia. You've got 5 more minutes.
Great, thank you. So yeah, so I just kind of went through and I'm really loving how the sort of realistic shadows are contrasting with the less realistic, more stylized line art. It reminds me a little bit of how the Art Nouveau signs looked, where they would have some really strong, bold line work accompanied by some really soft rendered realistic areas. So I think that that looks really cool and is kind of like the effect that this is giving. So, you know, something else to think about when you are mixing supplies, like using pens and watercolor, that you can really get creative with, you know, how you handle different parts of the painting. So you can mix and match not just the materials, but also how much detail is in certain areas versus maybe some parts are more illustrative or cartoony looking, and then some parts are more realistic. So there's a lot of flexibility. And I think this is such a great pair of tools for that reason. And then I just added in a couple little speckles into the wings. You can add whatever you like. I'm going to zoom in a little more actually so you guys can see some of the detail closer up. There's my little character. And, you know, maybe I'll add some details like pockets and stuff like that. And shoelaces. And then for the ground, I'm just kind of drawing some like squiggles, some little rocks. Could add some little blades of grass starting to emerge. If you wanted, you could also add in another detail like a little snail or something fun like a worm or a caterpillar. Maybe that's the fairy's little pet, something like that. I think that would be cute. Give them a little teeny weeny pocket watch. And there, just some dots. Maybe a little necklace. Maybe he has some antennas too. Give him some little antennas. They're kind of sticking out from under his acorn hat. And if you have a white gel pen or even a white colored pencil, it might be fun to go in and add some highlights. I'm just grabbing a white colored pencil because I have one handy that you could go in and add just a little bit of highlights in there too. Yeah, I think that would actually be fun too, you know, just with some colored pencils, just go in and add some highlights. They'll be incredibly subtle, but it'd be a nice way to kind of lighten up and add in. You could also use a white gel pen if you have one, but any kind of white colored pencil you have will do. You can just go in and add some little highlights.
This is so cute, Amelia. I love it.
Yeah. Thank you. So yeah, let me zoom out and we can look at the full illustration.
I want to touch those leaves.
I know. Yeah, isn't that so cool how that turns out like that?
Mm-hmm.
Say hi
So
to.
cool. Oh, yay. Oh, hold on. Remove spotlight. Let me spotlight you. This is the new intern.
Yes. Hello.
Meow. He's like, what's going on?
She's like, put me down. She's like, I was busy exploring. But yeah, so it was wreaking havoc in the background.
We got to get her acquainted with a paintbrush.
Yes. Yeah. But maybe not quite yet, because I feel like she'll rip it apart.
That's
She's
fair.
ferocious. Ferocious little beast.
So cute.
So cute, so tiny.
Amazing. All right. Well, thank you so much. It came out so good. I'm looking forward to seeing everybody's on Mix as well.
Yeah.
So let me remove spotlight here. Awesome. All right. Well, we're at time. Amelia, thank you so much for class today.
You're welcome.
And thank you everyone for joining us live as well. And yeah, we can't wait to see what you've made. Thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks everybody. Have a nice
Bye,
night.
everyone.
Weekend.
Have a
Bye.
good weekend. Bye, Lori.